Okay, and with that, I'm finally able to announce today's event. This was done pretty much on the fly on December 1st. The lab was renamed. I'm not sure to what, I don't care. And we instantly sprung into action and figured we need to do something about it, gather some people to strategize, maybe start a campaign, and but also, that's the other part of it, tell the general public that may drive by NREL's facilities or NCARs for that matter every day and not know what a treasure they have, not just for Colorado, but for the nation and the world. Obviously, a couple weeks later, I think 2 weeks later, came the attack on NCAR. It's a sorry state of affairs. But there are some perspectives that our panelists are going to share. We had to be a little cautious not to let sleeping dogs lie, or actually no, we had to be cautious to let them sleep, right? Ah. Anyway, so if you look at this this flyer, that it's not my first design. My first design had the NREL emblem being demolished by a wrecking ball, but I was advised that we couldn't be so frank, and I think tonight we can be frank, and I invite you to be frank. The kind of regime we live under is somewhat unpredictable, and we can't just be silent. With that, I'll open it up in a moment to our first presenter, who isn't here in the room with us. Somebody suggested I talk to AG Phil Weiser to see whether he had anything to say about our predicament, and he agreed to do that. So let me give him the first word.
We know that clean, renewable energy is the future. Take a look at China. Take a look around the world. The fact that we have an administration in Washington attacking critical energy, it's a tragedy. The fact that NCAR, more important than ever, as a center to understand changing weather patterns, is under attack is another tragedy. Here in Colorado, we fight back. I'm in court fighting for NCAR. I'm in court fighting attacks on science, standing up for the work that we have to do together to build a clean energy future that recognizes climate change is not some faraway threat, it's here. We've got work to do, and in Colorado, we're not waiting. We're moving ahead, and we're calling on our federal government to act responsibly, to follow the law, and to make sure that we're not getting in the way of critical investments, like in electric vehicle infrastructure. The work at NREL, it's a model for our nation. We need to move ahead. And if our government in Washington is putting their head in the sand, we're not going to follow. We're going to continue to lead. We're going to continue to fight for a better future. As your Attorney General, that's my commitment. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for standing up for renewable energy and fighting for a better future for us all.
Okay. And with that, just a tiny little bit about our speakers. Our speakers will introduce themselves so they can decide what they want to share. And our first speaker is David Hurlbut. this button will advance the slides.
Okay, great. All right, thank you all for being here, especially on such short notice and such a recent turn of events. Not completely unexpected, but you know, it's enough to get my rankles up nevertheless. One thing I hope we get from this meeting is a better sense of how to impact the midterm elections. Outrage is a start, and God knows we have plenty of reason for outrage. But at some point, outrage has to become resolve behind actions that will sway hearts and minds. Now, on December 1st, DOE announced NREL's name change. And at first I was pissed, not surprised, but still pissed. Over the next week, though, I came to realize that it wasn't the name. What truly angered me was what the changing name symbolized. Renewable research quietly defunded, researchers, friends of mine, intimidated and told never to use the terms climate change, clean energy, or emission reduction. On top of that, I noticed an aggressive social media spin campaign to make it look like things at the lab were okay, and that changing the name was no big deal. The worst part of the propaganda campaign was that people I knew began to buy the spin. The lab was still there, they said, so maybe a new name is actually something we can live with. So let me be clear. It's not the name, it's the mission. That's where I am today. Erasing renewable energy from the name is a visible symbol of the pernicious ploy that's not visible, deliberately undermining the capacity for clean energy science that has been NREL's core mission for half a century. I know that this Secretary of Energy won't change the name back. No illusions about that. But the name change is still a publicly visible symbol of what we need to defend, and that's how I plan to use it. Now, I retired from NREL about 2 years ago. I was the lab's senior expert on wholesale power markets and transmission policy. I came to NREL in 2007 from the staff of the Texas Public Utilities Commission, and I was on the agency's team that oversaw the creation of ERCOT. Once we got the market up and running in 2001, I and my colleagues closely monitored its daily activity to make sure that the disaster that happened in California didn't happen in Texas. Among the particular areas that I led was renewable energy, and it was during this time that Texas began to blow everyone away with how fast it deployed wind power. Now wait, what? Red state Texas leading in renewable energy when they're so in love with their fossil fuels? Yes, I've heard speakers here at CRES events scratch their heads about that, and they're usually stumped as to how that happened. But I can tell you chapter and verse how that happened, because I wrote some of those chapters. Trust me, Texas was no accident. The wind boom happened because it was designed to happen. We did it by thinking differently, by finding hidden opportunities, grounding every step in empirical fact, anticipating the opposition, and leaning into the state's strengths. That's what we have to do now. We have to keep the message of clean energy and climate change visible in a political environment of engineered chaos. Now, climate change is different. It doesn't involve federal agents gunning down civilians or children being separated from their parents or perfidious war crimes or a violation of a woman's right to make reproductive decisions. The murder of Renee Good by an ICE agent in broad daylight, on camera, is the latest egregious act of a despotic regime, and we should say her name and name the crime. Then, we need to press the fight that you and I have the knowledge to wage. Climate change has a place on the turbulent public agenda, and we respectfully take that place alongside all of the other more visceral issues that before our eyes are threatening democracy and our children's future. Now, more than other issues, climate change depends on science. We need science to see it, science to fix it. Therefore, it's no surprise that a key part of Trump's war on clean energy is an assault on the scientific institutions like NREL and NCAR. So how do we score enough wins in the midterm elections so that we have a chance of protecting those institutions? First, we need to lean into facts. The lies and disinformation coming from the other side are legion, and it may seem like truth is already a casualty, but it isn't. Please do not give in to this cynicism, because we can do nothing if we give up on the efficacy of truth. That is where our strategic advantage lies, and we need to work it. So what's the message, and how do we push it out? Now, I'm going to talk about economics. Later, my colleagues here will talk about other aspects of the war on clean energy, and these are all different notes of the same chord, and we need to strike that chord together and loudly. Now, one lie we hear often is that renewables are expensive. So let's take a look at that. Ever since 2008, America has seen an astounding transformation. Wind and solar are up by a lot. Coal is down by a lot. But our electric bills have actually remained stable. These numbers are adjusted for inflation, and you can see the trend very clearly. And that's fact number one. Renewables are up, coal is down, prices are stable. We're doing it. Now, there's another fact that jumps out from this chart. There's still a lot more to do. What we've accomplished as a nation since 2008 is proof that we can do more. And to do it, we need the science. We need NREL pushing out the patents, grid management tools, and analysis that keep clean energy growing and affordable, as it has done in the past. We need NREL solidly carrying forward its historic mission. Now, last year, 2025, was a somewhat different story. Trump escalated his war on clean energy by canceling renewable energy leases and by trying to keep old coal plants open by executive fiat. The economic result has been undeniable. Electricity prices are going up. If you take each month that this regime has been in power and compare inflation-adjusted prices to a year earlier, there is no doubt that electricity is less affordable now than it was a year ago. Nationwide, the increase has actually wiped out a comparable decrease in prices that customers enjoyed from 2022 to 2024. Now, many of you here and online know how complicated utility rate cases can be. Many things affect electricity prices, and these things vary from state to state and from utility to utility. But two trends are emerging in the state data. First, states that already have large amounts of wind and solar on their system aren't getting hit by price increases as much as the rest of the country. Second, customers in several states that lean on coal the most are in fact seeing their bills go up faster. Now, here in Colorado, both state trends are colliding, and the rate increases sought by utilities have been huge. Keeping Comanche 3 and Craig online is expensive, and we're paying for it. Renewables are helping, but coal remains the economic albatross hanging from the necks of Colorado customers. So all this comes down to three critical talking points that you and I can take into 2026. First, America's energy transformation has been working. Renewables are up, coal has gone down, and through 2024, prices have been stable. Renewables did not increase electricity prices, and it's a lie to say that they did. Second, Trump's war on clean energy is helping push electricity prices higher. More in some states that lean on coal, less in some states that have come to embrace renewables. Third, there's still much more to do, and we've got 16 years of momentum to build on. For that, we need science. We need the National Center for Atmospheric Research. We need the National Renewable Energy Laboratory and its historical mission. We need the science now more than ever, and that is what we are called to defend. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Very well stated, as always. And my name is Jeff Logan. I'm going to follow up on David's talk that was, mainly focused on big picture economic issues related to the Trump policies. And I'm going to give some specific examples of how prices are either already rising or they're going to start accelerating their increase in the coming years. And I also first want to thank Martin for organizing this. He always puts a lot of work into making these things happen. So thank you, Martin. So I have spent over 30 years working at what I think are some of the really fascinating clean energy institutions around the globe, including 2 different national labs, the International Energy Agency in Paris, World Resources Institute, and the Congressional Research Service. I did not, however, vocally support renewable energy until the year 2008, and that is when the economics of renewables finally became clear. And ever since 2008, they have become better and more compelling compared to any other energy source out there. So this is what's motivating me, that the Trump administration, like their tariff policy, the energy strategy that the Trump administration is imposing is putting unnecessary taxes or fees on our energy choices for purely political reasons. But the politics cannot defy the rules of gravity or the rules of economics. Today, wind and solar power have become the fastest growing source of new energy around the world due to their low costs and relatively quick construction times. They have no fuel costs or direct emissions of harmful pollutants. Combined with increasingly cheap storage, they can provide reliable and affordable power cleanly. These technologies and other electro technologies, such as electric vehicles and heat pumps, will ultimately win in the marketplace, even as the administration tries to slow them down, needlessly endangering affordability, national security, and the environment. Over the past year, we have further ceded control of future energy markets to the Chinese with potentially devastating implications. So I want to lay out a few examples of where we are currently seeing prices increase. And then, I encourage you to think more, and after the event is over, come up to us and say, hey, wait, what about this? You didn't talk about this thing that is bugging me. So the goal here is really, like Martin said, we hopefully want to create a campaign where we can get people pissed off about why prices are unnecessarily going up, why our environment is being threatened unnecessarily for purely political reasons, and make an impact on the midterm elections, which are now less than a year away, and we're going to be approaching them very quickly. So we want to try to build momentum, expand beyond. Obviously we're going to work in Colorado on this, but we need to work in many, many other states and make an impact on people's decisions to go out and vote and who they're going to vote for. So the first example I'm going to bring up happens here in Colorado. David mentioned the CRES generation station out in western Colorado, not too far from Steamboat Springs. And not too long ago, Chris Wright, who's the head of the Department of Energy, ordered Unit 1, which is a 440 megawatt coal-fired unit built in the 70s or 80s. It's pretty old. It's a junker, put it that way. And he ordered it to stay online, even though the owners of the plant want it retired. They don't want to saddle their customers with higher bills. They don't need the electricity. And they're making this lie that for reliability purposes, it has to be kept online and kept running. The Sierra Club estimates that it will cost about $85 million a year to keep the plant operating. And this is one of many coal plants around the country ordered to stay online, and more are likely to be added to the list, especially if this frenzy over data center construction continues. So there's the first example here in our backyard. Second, policies passed by the previous Congress provided specific incentives for wind, solar, batteries, and other advanced technologies. These incentives were largely overridden in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act that was passed in July of 2025. Fortunately, given the leading economic profiles of these generation sources and these other tools that complement them, the reversal of the incentives will not play a huge role in slowing use, but it will still make electricity use more expensive. My third example here is that the administration is trying to block all offshore wind projects and any wind or solar project that happens on federal land. Private companies have already invested about $25 billion in offshore wind projects, and they're being built, and some of them are near completion. Trump claims that the offshore wind projects are a national security issue due to military radar interference, but the Biden administration and other administrations before that have shown that, yes, in some cases there are slight concerns, but that we have simple fixes to overcome these things. It's not like you should, stop $25 billion worth of investment over some little thing that can be easily solved by changing your processes. And many coastal states are relying on these sources of high capacity factor energy to meet growing energy demand. A judge ruled earlier last week that the $6 billion project off Rhode Island cannot be stopped, at least for now, and that it is 87% complete. If it were to be canceled, it would result in a 10 times larger loss than the Cylinder project from the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2008 that foes of renewables love to vilify. This is destruction by choice that the administration is pursuing. In the meantime, earlier this week, China announced that it deployed a 20 megawatt wind turbine off of the coast of Fujian province. And that's like 2 or 3 times bigger than anything we can produce here or that we deploy here. So again, this is an example of just handing everything over to China and say, go ahead, you can lead. Fourth, the administration continues to push full bore on exports of liquefied natural gas, even while domestic prices surge. LNG exports are by far the fastest growing source of gas use. We now export almost 15% of all the gas that we produce. And we have grown our gas production enormously, as everyone here probably knows. But those increasing exports are driving up domestic prices here. And every one of us is paying the price for that, while only the LNG export companies are really benefiting from it. And those companies are friends of Chris Wright, you can be certain. This one is really interesting to me. The cost of climate change is causing utilities, especially in California, like Pacific Gas and Electric, to have to invest in wildfire mitigation. The customers in PG&E's territory now pay 7 cents per kilowatt hour extra for the utility to do mitigation to stop the threat of wildfires. That's insane. That's like 20% of their entire bill. Electricity is expensive in California, like 30, 35 cents a kilowatt hour. So 7 cents is a lot to pay extra just for dealing with the threat of wildfire. And here in Colorado, as everyone probably knows, we're facing the same kinds of pressures that California did years ago, or earlier than we did. And you probably saw that tomorrow Xcel again is likely to shut off power as a public safety measure. And we may or may not see higher tariffs related to mitigating the threat of climate change on our electric bills. But one thing I think we're really going to see is more and more risk transferred from Xcel to individual customers in the form of shutting off their power and then having their refrigerator have to get thrown out and reloaded. It's going to happen more and more often. So I'm just going to wrap up and finally say that the administration has tried to eliminate the most cost-effective solution of all, and that's energy efficiency. And that's what I always, before I could say, yeah, I stand behind renewables, I was always saying I stand behind energy efficiency because it is the cheapest source out there that you can tap into. And it appears that even a bipartisan Congress finally woke up to that absurdity by restoring, or at least hopefully in these mini omnibus bills that they're debating right now, they restored a lot of funding to the Energy Star program and other science-based energy research in the most recent draft budget discussions that they're having. So Congress needs to go further, though, and tell the administration that they must allocate prior funding as directed by Congress. Because after all, the President proposes and Congress disposes. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, good. It's there. Thank you all for being here. I mean, it's just great to see this many people here. This is a really important subject. And let me just get my notes going here for a second. I'm former Colorado State Representative Tracy Burnett. I retired a couple of years ago. And I was prime sponsor of a number of bills that you guys would all like, including the clean heat statute that means you have to, gas utilities have to have clean heat plans, building energy codes that really promotes heat pumps, gas demand side management that goes after energy efficiency, microgrid roadmap, Buy Clean Colorado is a green construction materials, on and on and on. But I want to make a point here. These bills would not have passed without the science behind them from NCAR and NREL. So I just want to make that very clear. Thank you for that. So I'm going to try to be hopeful here. I mean, we have hit a big bump in the road with the Trump administration. But there are things that you can do and that I'm doing that will give us hope and fight, just like Phil Weiser said. We need to fight back right here in Colorado as well as across the nation. So I want to give you guys some hope. So first of all, I think that the horse has left the barn. The train has left the station in terms of renewables. This is going forward. Renewables are leading the way in terms of new U.S. power plant construction. This is just very recent information, just from 2025. You know, battery storage is really bumping up. There's a lot of good things that we're doing right here, well, here in the U.S. But I want to talk specifically, well, I have one more slide here. And as one of you said, Texas is leading the way in some renewable energy production. You know, this stuff is going on. We are doing a lot as a nation. But in Colorado, we are really leading the way in many ways in that transition to a sustainable future. In terms of electricity generation, Xcel says that their power generation will be 80% renewable by 2030. Hopefully data centers doesn't mess with that. But Holy Cross Energy, late last year, they hit 95% renewables in May. This thing is coming, and Colorado is leading the way. You probably just heard on the news recently that we just topped the nation in the third quarter of 2025 in terms of EV sales, setting a nation record for that. Yeah, so, you know, so we need to keep doing this. I mean, I have a Tesla, I love it, other than it's Tesla. But it is, you know, but this stuff is cool. People really like it. Okay, we are leading the way in many other ways. Clean heat. I passed the first in the nation clean heat statute that says gas utilities must meet greenhouse gas emissions in buildings. They must reduce those greenhouse gas emissions by 100% by 2050. That is law, and that's being implemented right now. Another one that's really cool, building energy codes. This is another one of my bills. It incentivizes not only more efficient, better building envelopes for new buildings, but it, for the first time ever, this is leading the nation. The first time ever, it's recognizing that heat pumps are a heck of a lot more efficient than gas furnaces. And it's leveling the playing field. And according to Rocky Mountain Institute, or RMI, this will take, between now and 2050, it represents 17 million metric tons of greenhouse gas off the road, off of here, and it represents 3.9 million gas cars for 1 year. Just this one bill alone, building energy codes. So some other things that Colorado is doing. Methane rules for industry. We're the leader in the nation in terms of reining in methane. We want to get rid of it all, but at least for now we can keep on making oil and gas reduce their methane usage, the methane releases. And that includes also landfills. There's some new rules on methane rules for landfills. In terms of recycling, there's a new bill that was passed a couple years ago, Producer Responsibility Act. It doubles the paper and packaging recycling rate by 2035 right here in Colorado. Another thing, this is just an example of why it's so important for Colorado to lead the way. Back in 2021, I passed sort of a pretty leading edge bill called Buy Clean Colorado that required greener construction materials for not only for state buildings but also for state transportation projects. Well, this federal government under Biden looked at that and said, boy, Colorado did it the right way. And they implemented a lot of those at the federal level. Now, during this current administration, it's probably not going ahead. However, I just read the other day that states are moving forward with Buy Clean policies despite Trump's reversal. So we can keep showing how to do it and others will follow. So I want to just leave with some hope. There's a brand new report that a number of environmental organizations here in Colorado just put together. It's called the Clean, Affordable Climate Pathways Report. It's very readable, and it basically it analyzed all these different ways. How do we go from where we are now to meeting our greenhouse gas emissions goals by 2050? We can do it. This report says we can do it. And they went through a bunch of different scenarios, and they said the first thing is prioritize electrification, prioritize energy efficiency, and don't be so rigid on each sector meeting its greenhouse gas emission goals, electric utilities versus gas versus buildings and transportation. But pick the lowest cost option over being sector specific in how you get there. But on the way, this is going to save Coloradans a ton of money, and it's going to greatly improve our air quality and also our health outcomes. So take a look at it. For you techie kind folks, it probably won't be detailed enough, but you can certainly ask the organizations that are behind it. Well, give me more information. How do we, how are you actually doing this? So finally, we have hit a major bump in the road in our transition to a sustainable future, but it will continue. This is going on despite what's going on at the federal level. Colorado is and will continue to lead the way. So here's my advice for each of you. What can I do? Focus on state and local climate actions. That's what gives me hope every day. I am working every single day on things that I think will move Colorado forward and show everybody else the rest of the way. And also do what you can at the national level. And I'll give one little piece of advice if you're talking, if you happen to be talking to somebody in Pennsylvania about climate or, trying to get them to vote differently this coming November. Start, as a politician, this is what I learned. Start where they are. Meet them where they are. Not everybody cares about climate change, but I'll tell you, a lot of moms would care about air quality or some other thing. So find that common ground and start from there and see whether you can build out and get them to understand and consider voting against the current administration. Thank you so much. Okay. And I'd like to introduce Martin Voelker.
Hello, good evening, everybody. Are you going to set me up there, Martin? Just
Hit the arrow, yeah.
Just hit the down arrow, okay? Oh, yeah, who was born this day in 1929? Martin Luther King Day. Let's realize he's the man that kind of told us how to address a certain form of tyranny, and we're facing that now. We're all here because we're all part of a community that's geographically tied to these institutions, NCAR, NREL, different scientific communities, institutions, and it's like if we don't be if we're not the ones that are really pushing this, who do you expect in other parts of the country to be doing this? So we're here this evening in large part to recognize that the group of people who are here this evening are those that are going to, really step up and take the leadership. What we need to do, I believe, and it's been mentioned, I think it's obvious to most everybody here that there's some change that's going to be needed to be taken here. And it's not just locally and in Colorado, it's across the country. As Tracy said, let's be hopeful and let's act local. Let's think local, and you saw the suggestions that she has, and I really subscribe to that. This is the way a lot of people are acting in a local way. Most of these people in that crowd care deeply about the climate crisis, and as we all do here. But it wasn't the only thing that brought them out to the Capitol. A lot of other things, and there's a lot of people who are here tonight because of our allegiance to renewable energy and addressing the climate crisis. But we have a whole set of other concerns about what's going on out there. And this is what's going on. We have an opportunity, as has been mentioned, at the midterm elections. This is a national election, and we're a blue state. So we know which way we're going to go in this state, but that's really not the excuse for us not to be pushing, because we have friends and colleagues across this country, and I'll be talking more about how we actually address this issue, because the Capitol at this point has been too deferential to the executive, and the Supreme Court has been acting too much in favor of the extension of executive power. So I think that we, in addition to thinking and acting locally, we also need to think national and act national. Now, I could go through a long recital of what I call the outrages that we've seen since Trump came in first, and now that he's in now. As you saw, the very first day, he issued an executive decree that says we have an energy emergency. All of a sudden, we've got an energy emergency. We don't have like a climate crisis, we have an energy emergency. So then we see him stripping the names renewable and energy off of the lab. We've talked about that. And then the shock of we're going to dismantle NCAR. But I'd like to talk a little bit more about that, because our senators Hickenlooper and Bennett have been pretty successful at advocating in a very strong way inside Congress to do something about NCAR. They're not really doing much that they can do about NREL, but they're doing what they can with NCAR. This is outrageous. The President of the United States gets in front of 200 countries around the world and proclaims that climate change is a hoax. I mean, everybody's looking at him, they're rolling their eyes, saying, what is going on in America? And so these are just a few. I mean, we could spend the evening, well, Maury, you forgot to mention this, you forgot to mention that. There's like 100 different things that have outraged us that are going on out there. Now, I don't know what about you, but my very first thought on December 1st, when I heard that they changed the name of the lab, the very first thing that came to my mind was this, okay? I mean, hey, I'm sure that most of you have read this book. A lot of it was required reading back in the day. And of all the things that he mentioned in 1984, it's new speak that is what the lab name change is sort of a representative of. So what is Newspeak? Well, we're seeing in front of our eyes. And it's just like, remember, we must not be afraid of the thought police. That means the MAGA Republicans or Trump or the Gestapo coming after us for writing or saying things that we've been talking about for years, like climate change or externalities, greenhouse gases, tipping points. These are words that should not be verboten. So this is more of a technical description of what Newspeak is, according to George Orwell. It's a propagandistic language that is characterized by euphemism, obviously contradictory information, and inversion of customary meanings. Basically, they just flipping the language around, and if we get word that there are people at NREL or NCAR or NSF or the National Academy of Sciences or otherwise, where they are where they're told by their supervisors, let's not get crosswise with our dear leader and say things that are true. If people kowtow to that, then they're slipping right into Newspeak. Exactly what Orwell warned us not to do. So I like this quote from George Orwell. I'll let you take a minute to, I'll just read it. It was intended that when Newspeak had been adopted once and for all, and Old Speak had been forgotten, which is a heretical thought, should be literally unthinkable, at least so far as thought is dependent on words. So it's like, don't even think about it, okay? Don't even think about it. This is key. In George Orwell's 1984, the final lie is the party's ability to make people reject the evidence of their own senses. Like, okay, it's 65 degrees and it's January 15th, and there's no skiing. And, but, hey, we've always had changes in the weather. I remember back, let's not let that kind of thing creep into our minds. This is a very, very, very solid thought. We have now sunk to the depth of which restatement of the obvious is the first duty of intelligent men and women. Look what is happening with Newspeak. The United States Institute of Peace has now been called the Donald J. Trump. You know about this one. You know about this one. You know about the Department of War. You know about this, you know about that. Where, it just keeps on going, and it's all according to the playbook. Yeah. Okay. Right. So, I was outraged when the lab name was changed, but that was overcome, and my outrage accelerated dramatically when we get the word about NCAR. I mean, it's one thing to change the name, and we could live with that, but going after NCAR is super, super serious. So then, just about a week ago, Trump withdraws the United States from 66 different international organizations that are involved with climate. And so I'm going to offer my suggestion as what people in this room and others can be doing. I like to think about a certain group called the creative class. These are artists, writers, activists, musicians, filmmakers, actors, bloggers, YouTube people, networkers, and the good trouble people that are out there who have their own methods to their madness as to how they're going to go about communicating the need for change in this country. And this is our community of interest here, and we're kind of specialists on climate change and renewable energy. But we stand up, okay, and we stand up for NREL and science. This is a good way that I thought of how we could take a lesson from the past on how to actually stand up. This is the 250th birthday of this country. You say you want a revolution, well, you know. Yep, that's what we need. We need to get people's minds on task. Now, what happened? You know, I'm sure a lot of you are aware of the Ken Burns piece on the American Revolution. It's just been seen by millions of people. And in there, there's a discussion about Thomas Paine. Well, when you studied your American history, you remember that he was the guy that wrote Common Sense. Well, remember that that was very influential in getting the founding fathers really pissed off and riled up to say, we cannot tolerate living under a tyranny. Well, we're living under a tyranny of a different sort now. And we could take a page from Common Sense and from Tom Paine. The challenge is this. That's a very ugly picture. And the rest of the world is looking at that and saying, what in the world is going on? And we are the ones that have to revise this map. Now, we can't revise it until 2028 on the presidential level, but we could sure start to revise it in 2026 with the midterm elections. So the Congress looks like this. You're all very much aware of that. The White House is off the rails. This guy's a rambling man, and he's just saying everything just by whim. And the Republicans in particular in Congress are just sort of going along with the thing because they believe in this golden age that the leader is going to deliver to them. The Supreme Court was stacked by Trump, okay? And so it's sort of going along with the executive powers. And so what is our plan? And that's why you're here this evening. I think that we'll be taking some time to think and talk about how do we, as a community of interest here, really focus in on the midterm and to push for renewables and the attention to the climate crisis. So I want to have you all thank Martin in particular for doing this. Yeah. And I also want to thank the Unitarian Church for opening up its doors to us. I mean, that's really a wonderful thing. Thank you for coming this evening.
Well, good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming out. My name's Chuck Kutcher. I'm an engineer. I retired from NREL after a 40-year career as a researcher and a manager there. I retired 7 years ago. And the last 25 years, I've spent a lot of time on the climate change issue. And one of the things I'm very concerned about today is that kind of disinformation that Maury was talking about is definitely true in the case of climate change. And so my topic is the abdication of U.S. responsibility in addressing climate change and also clean energy, which is the solution to that problem. So we talked about NCAR being under threat. We hope that its funding gets saved. But I just want to point out, the very, very first climate science conference in the United States was in Boulder in 1965. So America has always been a strong player in this. And the reason it was held in Boulder is because of NCAR. When that conference was held, these buildings were actually under construction at that time. If you go back to 1988, NASA's James Hansen, a physicist who was head of the Goddard Institute for Space Studies, testified in front of the Senate. And that was the first time the U.S. Congress really heard Not only is climate change a threat, but it's already happening. And I just want to point out to people, that was 38 years ago. And we really have not made much progress. We set a new global record for carbon emissions every year, except occasional years where there's an economic crisis. Now, one of the frustrations is that there's so much disinformation on climate change itself. We can all see it happening. Maury mentioned, how warm it is in January, for example. So most people are not denying that the climate is changing. So they've shifted to the strategy of saying, well, yeah, it's changing, but it's not caused by burning fossil fuels. And you know what? It's not that serious. And the other thing you often hear is, look, climate change is natural. It's occurred throughout geologic history of the Earth. It doesn't really matter what the climate was doing when the dinosaurs walked the Earth. This is what's important. I want to show you this curve here. So our species, Homo sapiens, have been on this planet for about 300,000 years. But it's only in the last 10,000 years, if you look at this graph, it's only in the last 10,000 years that human civilization developed. Why is that? Well, we came out of a very cold period, a glacial period. Sea level came way up, and as you see on the chart, temperature came way up. And then we entered this 10,000-year period. Some people call it the Goldilocks period. This very, very steady temperature and steady sea level. And you can see what's happening on the right there. We've driven ourselves dramatically out of that. And we know what's causing it. If you look at this lower graph, on the top, you see carbon dioxide levels shoot up when we start burning coal, oil, and natural gas. And on the bottom, you can see the temperature change going up with those carbon emissions. The other thing I want to point out is if you look at that blue area, that lower black curve, do you see how it's actually going down slightly? So we were actually in the typical orbital parameter cycle that the Earth goes through. We are basically at the top of the carbon dioxide and the top of the temperature, and the Earth we should be in a very, very gradual cooling period. So I hate when I'm listening to the radio or watching TV and some reporter says, human beings are influencing global warming or climate change. No, we're not influencing it. We are causing the warming. The planet should be gradually cooling right now. And so not only have we warmed by over 2 degrees Fahrenheit, the average surface temperature of the Earth, we've also warmed the oceans. Okay, that has a huge effect. Most of the heat, 90% of it actually goes into the oceans. But it's also been very non-uniform. For example, the Arctic has warmed much more than mid-latitudes. What drives weather patterns? It's the temperature differences on the Earth that drive the wind and drive the weather. And so this very non-uniform heating has resulted in weather patterns that human beings have never experienced in this 10,000-year period. And so this is a chart that NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, kept data for since 1980. And those bars there, the different colors represent different events like severe storms, wildfires, that sort of thing. But these are billion-dollar events. It's adjusted for inflation, okay, so it's constant value dollars. And what you can see by the size of those columns, these keep going up. Now, NOAA has been told no more. You cannot keep this data anymore. Another Orwellian thing that we see going on. So this is the last one that was published. This is 2024. Most destructive wildfire in Colorado history, all right, the Marshall Fire, happened in the winter time. Remember when wildfires didn't happen in the winter, right? 1,000 homes destroyed. 2 people lost their lives. 1,000 pets died. The fire moved so fast, it was so hot, so fast, people could not get home to save their pets. This is the soaring cost of climate change. We see it going up every year. Study after study shows that the cost of transitioning from fossil fuels to renewables and electrifying our homes and our vehicles to use that low-cost solar and wind electricity, making that transition costs much less than cleaning up the damage from climate change. So what responsibility do we have? What really matters in terms of driving climate change is the accumulated carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And guess which country is most responsible for what's up there? It's us. We're responsible for a quarter of it. China's number 2. They're emitting more annually now than we are, but they're still behind us in terms of the total added. And also, as the other speakers have pointed out, China is really doing a lot, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. One of the first things that Chris Wright did when he became Secretary of Energy, Mr. Wright was an oil and gas CEO here in Denver. One of the first things he did is he brought in a team of 5 well-known climate change deniers and paid them to write a report basically dismissing climate change science. It was done hastily, it was done poorly, and the scientific community just tore it apart. About 80 scientists got together and wrote a report that point by point showed how false it was. That committee has now since been disbanded. Maury pointed out that Trump pulled out of the Global Climate Treaty. This is the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. So the United Nations has behind these conferences of parties that happen every year, behind the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. All these things started shortly after Jim Hansen gave his testimony to the Senate back in 1988. And basically, every nation in the world is involved in this, and we're now out of it.
North Korea.
North Korea? Good point. Thanks. DOE, as you see, removes renewable from National Renewable Energy Laboratory. And as someone pointed out, they didn't just remove renewable, they removed the term renewable energy. And then you've also heard the Energy Department adds climate change and emissions to banned words list. There was an article in the Colorado Sun recently by a communications person who unfortunately got laid off from NREL last May. And part of her job was to scour documents for these terms that need to be eliminated. It was not a comfortable job for her to get involved in. Anyway, meanwhile, while all this stuff is going on, all this disinformation, everything is being done to stop the growth of renewable energy, to end action to address climate change. China is going gangbusters. You've heard the term petrostate, you know, for countries that rely on fossil fuels for their economy. So the term now is electrostate, and it really has 2 meanings. It means producing electricity from low-cost renewables, basically solar and wind, and batteries play a role in that too. But then also using that electricity to basically electrify transportation by going from, I'm sure many of you own electric vehicles, going from gasoline and diesel vehicles to electric, and going from gas furnaces in homes to heat pumps. So last year, heat pump sales for the first time in the US exceeded furnace sales. In Colorado, the latest data we have is from the 3rd quarter of last year, and Colorado had the largest percentage of electric vehicle sales, about 33%, about 1/3 of new car sales in Colorado were electric. Colorado's also doing very well in terms of decarbonizing its grid. So the electricity coming into this room right now from PSCO, Public Service of Colorado, or Excel, is on track to be 80% from solar and wind in just the next 4 years. So we are actually doing very good things in Colorado. My hope is that we can show the rest of the country this makes good economic sense. The other thing I want to point out about China, again, being the first electrostate. This is according to DOE, the Department of Energy's Energy Information Administration. The 277 billion watts of utility-scale solar capacity that China installed in 2024, just that 1 year, was greater than all the solar that's ever been installed in the United States. They did that in 1 year. So, you know, I view what's happening with China as a wake-up call. If you either recall, old enough to recall, or you remember your history, when the Soviet Union put the first artificial satellite in orbit in 1957, boy, did the U.S. react. It was a shocker, all right, because we were supposed to be, after World War II, you know, the leading nation in terms of science and technology. And they scooped us. And of course, they put the first man in space, too. That launched an incredible U.S. effort to develop the space program. Landing on the moon is often viewed as an incredible accomplishment, maybe the greatest accomplishment, certainly the greatest technical accomplishment probably ever achieved in this country, maybe anywhere. And this is an iconic image. And it's kind of funny, you know, in history, sometimes things happen almost by chance. And this image is called Earthrise. It was by William or Bill Anders, an astronaut who was on Apollo 8. He shot this image on Christmas Eve, 1968. And I hope you'll let me geek out a little bit here, because as a kid, as a teenager in the 1960s when all this space program was going on, I was just glued to the TV and newspapers reading it. But what happened here was, of course, the Apollo 11 was the first mission to land men on the moon. Apollo 8 was the first mission where we sent men to the moon, and they went in orbit around the moon. They actually orbited it 10 times. And when they did that, they took pictures of the lunar surface. They were scouting out landing sites, and they were kind of mapping out the surface of the moon. And they had their windows of the space capsule aimed at the lunar surface. And they were taking lots of black and white photos. And back in those days, color film wasn't very good. Black and white was much better for a number of reasons. They got very high resolution images out of it. You don't really need color when you're taking pictures of the surface of the moon. But anyway, they had come around the, you know, as the moon, of course, goes around the Earth, it basically, there's one side that always faces the Earth, and then there's a far side that faces away. They'd come around on the 4th orbit around the backside. And as they did that, they rotated the spacecraft in order to get a different view of the ground. But when they did that, they brought in the horizon. And it just so happened at that time, Anders noticed, oh my God, it's the Earth. And the Earth is rising up the horizon. Now, if you think about it, all those 12 men that walked on the moon, from the moon, they never saw an Earth rise, right? Because the moon is not rotating, all right? The Earth just basically sits there in the sky. The reason they saw the Earth rise was not because the moon was rotating. It's because they were moving in orbit. That's what gave that's what caused this. So it was an absolutely incredible image, and as much planning as it went into the space program, nobody had ever thought of that. Nobody said, hey, you know, maybe you'll see the Earth rise, you know. And so they were just kind of shocked by this, and these guys were running around looking for color film. We can't shoot that with black and white. We got to find some color film to take a picture of that. And they're looking all over the place because this thing's happening fast. And Anders finally got a roll of Ektachrome. He shot 3 pictures. They didn't have any way. They didn't have a light meter even. I mean, they weren't designed to take this kind of a photo. So he took 3 photos at 3 different f-stops, and this wound up being the best one. This was on the cover of Time magazine. Maury was telling me earlier that some people say this is the most famous photograph ever taken. It's certainly up there. Anyway, what Anders said was, we came all this way to explore the moon, and we discovered the Earth. And so this was, again, the end of 1968. Only 16 months later was the first Earth Day. This photo really influenced the first Earth Day. And many of you may know that the coordinator of the Earth Day was Dennis Hayes. Dennis Hayes was the second director of NREL, back then called the Solar Energy Research Institute. And I was a young engineer. I had been working there 3 years when the Reagan administration fired Dennis from the laboratory, and we lost about half our staff. So this has happened before. We've been here before. We've gotten through it. We're going to have to get through it again. And the purpose of this meeting is to have discussions, to have you folks ask questions, make suggestions about, okay, how do we get through this crisis right now? Thanks very much. Being under threat, we hope that its funding gets saved. But I just want to point out, the very, very first climate science conference in the United States was in Boulder in 1965. So America has always been a strong player in this. And the reason it was held in Boulder is because of NCAR. When that conference was held, these buildings were actually under construction at that time. If you go back to 1988, NASA's James Hansen, a physicist who was head of the Goddard Institute for Space Studies, testified in front of the Senate. And that was the first time the US Congress really heard not only is climate change a threat, but it's already happening. And I just want to point out to people, that was 38 years ago. And we really have not made much progress. We set a new global record for carbon emissions every year, except occasional years where there's an economic crisis. Now, one of the frustrations is that there's so much disinformation on climate change itself. We can all see it happening. Maury mentioned, how warm it is in January, for example. So most people are not denying that the climate is changing. So they've shifted to the strategy of saying, well, yeah, it's changing, but it's not caused by burning fossil fuels. And you know what? It's not that serious. And the other thing you often hear is, look, climate change is natural. It's occurred throughout geologic history of the Earth. It doesn't really matter what the climate was doing when the dinosaurs walked the Earth. This is what's important. I want to show you this curve here. So our species, Homo sapiens, have been on this planet for about 300,000 years. But it's only in the last 10,000 years, if you look at this graph, it's only in the last 10,000 years that human civilization developed. Why is that? Well, we came out of a very cold period, a glacial period. Sea level came way up, and as you see on the chart, temperature came way up. And then we entered this 10,000-year period. Some people call it the Goldilocks period. This very, very steady temperature and steady sea level. And you can see what's happening on the right there. We've driven ourselves dramatically out of that. And we know what's causing it. If you look at this lower graph, on the top, you see carbon dioxide levels shoot up when we start burning coal, oil, and natural gas. And on the bottom, you can see the temperature change going up with those carbon emissions. The other thing I want to point out is if you look at that blue area, that lower black curve, do you see how it's actually going down slightly? So we were actually in the typical orbital parameter cycle that the Earth goes through. We are basically at the top of the carbon dioxide and the top of the temperature, and the Earth we should be in a very, very gradual cooling period. So I hate when I'm listening to the radio or watching TV and some reporter says, human beings are influencing global warming or climate change. No, we're not influencing it. We are causing the warming. The planet should be gradually cooling right now. And so not only have we warmed by over 2 degrees Fahrenheit, the average surface temperature of the Earth, we've also warmed the oceans. Okay, that has a huge effect. Most of the heat, 90% of it actually goes into the oceans. But it's also been very non-uniform. For example, the Arctic has warmed much more than mid-latitudes. What drives weather patterns? It's the temperature differences on the Earth that drive the wind and drive the weather. And so this very non-uniform heating has resulted in weather patterns that human beings have never experienced in this 10,000-year period. And so this is a chart that NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, kept data for since 1980. And those bars there, the different colors represent different events like severe storms, wildfires, that sort of thing. But these are billion-dollar events. It's adjusted for inflation, okay, so it's constant value dollars. And what you can see by the size of those columns, these keep going up. Now, NOAA has been told no more. You cannot keep this data anymore. Another Orwellian thing that we see going on. So this is the last one that was published. This is 2024. Most destructive wildfire in Colorado history, all right? The Marshall Fire happened in the winter time. Remember when wildfires didn't happen in the winter, right? 1,000 homes destroyed. 2 people lost their lives. 1,000 pets died. The fire moved so fast, it was so hot, so fast, people could not get home to save their pets. This is the soaring cost of climate change. We see it going up every year. Study after study shows that the cost of transitioning from fossil fuels to renewables and electrifying our homes and our vehicles to use that low-cost solar and wind electricity, making that transition costs much less than cleaning up the damage from climate change. So what responsibility do we have? What really matters in terms of driving climate change is the accumulated carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And guess which country is most responsible for what's up there? It's us. We're responsible for 1/4 of it. China's number 2. They're emitting more annually now than we are, but they're still behind us in terms of the total added. And also, as the other speakers have pointed out, China is really doing a lot, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. One of the first things that Chris Wright did when he became Secretary of Energy, Mr. Wright was an oil and gas CEO here in Denver. One of the first things he did is he brought in a team of 5 well-known climate change deniers and paid them to write a report basically dismissing climate change science. It was done hastily, it was done poorly, and the scientific community just tore it apart. About 80 scientists got together and wrote a report that point by point showed how false it was. That committee has now since been disbanded. Maury pointed out that Trump pulled out of the Global Climate Treaty. This is the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. So the United Nations has behind these conferences of parties that happen every year, behind the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. All these things started shortly after Jim Hansen gave his testimony to the Senate back in 1988. And basically, every nation in the world is involved in this, and we're now out of it.
North Korea.
North Korea? Good point. Thanks. DOE, as you see, removes renewable from National Renewable Energy Laboratory. And as someone pointed out, they didn't just remove renewable, they removed the term renewable energy. And then you've also heard the Energy Department adds climate change and emissions to banned words list. There was an article in the Colorado Sun recently by a communications person who unfortunately got laid off from NREL last May. And part of her job was to scour documents for these terms that need to be eliminated. It was not a comfortable job for her to get involved in. Anyway, meanwhile, while all this stuff is going on, all this disinformation, everything is being done to stop the growth of renewable energy, to end action to address climate change. China is going gangbusters. You've heard the term petrostate, you know, for countries that rely on fossil fuels for their economy. So the term now is electrostate, and it really has 2 meanings. It means producing electricity from low-cost renewables, basically solar and wind, and batteries play a role in that too. But then also using that electricity to basically electrify transportation by going from, I'm sure many of you own electric vehicles, going from gasoline and diesel vehicles to electric, and going from gas furnaces in homes to heat pumps. So last year, heat pump sales for the first time in the U.S. exceeded furnace sales. In Colorado, the latest data we have is from the third quarter of last year, and Colorado had the largest percentage of electric vehicle sales, about 33%, about a third of new car sales in Colorado were electric. Colorado is also doing very well in terms of decarbonizing its grid. So the electricity coming into this room right now from PSCO, Public Service of Colorado, or Excel, is on track to be 80% from solar and wind in just the next 4 years. So we are actually doing very good things in Colorado. My hope is that we can show the rest of the country this makes good economic sense. The other thing I want to point out about China, again, being the first electro state, this is according to DOE, the Department of Energy's Energy Information Administration. The 277 billion watts of utility-scale solar capacity that China installed in 2024, just that 1 year, was greater than all the solar that's ever been installed in the United States. They did that in 1 year. So, I view what's happening with China as a wake-up call. If you either recall, old enough to recall, or you remember your history, when the Soviet Union put the first artificial satellite in orbit in 1957, boy, did the U.S. react. It was a shocker, all right, because we were supposed to be, after World War II, the leading nation in terms of science and technology. And they scooped us. And of course, they put the first man in space, too. That launched an incredible U.S. effort to develop the space program. Landing on the moon is often viewed as an incredible accomplishment, maybe the greatest accomplishment, certainly the greatest technical accomplishment probably ever achieved in this country, maybe anywhere. And this is an iconic image. And it's kind of funny, in history, sometimes things happen almost by chance. And this image is called Earthrise. It was by William or Bill Anders, an astronaut who was on Apollo 8. He shot this image on Christmas Eve, 1968. And I hope you'll let me geek out a little bit here, because as a kid, as a teenager in the 1960s when all this space program was going on, I was just glued to the TV and newspapers reading it. But what happened here was, of course, the Apollo 11 was the first mission to land men on the moon. Apollo 8 was the first mission where we sent men to the moon, and they went in orbit around the moon. They actually orbited it 10 times. And when they did that, they took pictures of the lunar surface. They were scouting out landing sites, and they were kind of mapping out the surface of the moon. And they had their windows of the space capsule aimed at the lunar surface. And they were taking lots of black and white photos. And back in those days, color film wasn't very good. Black and white was much better for a number of reasons. They got very high resolution images out of it. You don't really need color when you're taking pictures of the surface of the moon. But anyway, they had come around as the moon, of course, goes around the Earth, it basically, there's one side that always faces the Earth, and then there's a far side that faces away. They come around on the fourth orbit around the backside. And as they did that, they rotated the spacecraft in order to get a different view of the ground. But when they did that, they brought in the horizon. And it just so happened at that time, Anders noticed, oh my God, it's the Earth. And the Earth is rising up the horizon. Now, if you think about it, all those 12 men that walked on the moon, from the moon, they never saw an Earth rise, right? Because the moon is not rotating, all right? The Earth just basically sits there in the sky. The reason they saw the Earth rise was not because the moon was rotating. It's because they were moving in orbit. That's what that's what caused this. So it was an absolutely incredible image. And as much planning as it went into the space program, nobody had ever thought of that. Nobody said, hey, maybe you'll see the Earth rise, And so they were just kind of shocked by this. And these guys were running around looking for color film. We can't shoot that with black and white. We got to find some color film to take a picture of that. And they're looking all over the place because this thing's happening fast. And Anders finally got a roll of Ektachrome. He shot 3 pictures. They didn't have any way, they didn't have a light meter even. I mean, they weren't designed to take this kind of a photo. So he took 3 photos at 3 different f-stops, and this wound up being the best one. This was on the cover of Time magazine. Maury was telling me earlier that some people say this is the most famous photograph ever taken. It's certainly up there. Anyway, what Anders said was, we came all this way to explore the moon, and we discovered the Earth. And so this was, again, the end of 1968. Only 16 months later was the first Earth Day. This photo really influenced the first Earth Day. And many of you may know that the coordinator of the Earth Day was Dennis Hayes. Dennis Hayes was the second director of NREL, back then called the Solar Energy Research Institute. And I was a young engineer. I had been working there 3 years when the Reagan administration fired Dennis from the laboratory. And we lost about half our staff. So this has happened before. We've been here before. We've gotten through it. We're going to have to get through it again. And the purpose of this meeting is to have discussions, to have you folks ask questions, make suggestions about, okay, how do we get through this crisis right now? Thanks very much.
Hi, I'm Lily Franklin, and I was just wondering if somebody could comment on the fact that although renewables are cheaper and Xcel is investing in a lot of renewables, the prices are skyrocketing, and you hear all sorts of things like data centers. They're trying to keep us in a transmission mode to keep centralized energy production instead of distributed. But what are your thoughts about why we're poised to see such huge rate increases in Colorado? And also maybe comment on the whole nuclear fad that's going on with that too.
Yeah, and to test that microphone, let me quickly comment on that. I recently read that actually, if you look at the price increases, some of that are simply explained by inflation, and that and natural inflation, given the value of the dollar. But Maury.
Well, thank you. We're paying around 15 cents a kilowatt hour on the residential side in Xcel service territory. We've heard stories about 30 cents in California. We have very high reliability in this state, but the prices are going up. Now, who does that hurt? It hurts people at the lower end. Low-income people pay a disproportionate amount of money, but it's hurting everybody. So the question is, what's causing that? What is causing the increase? It's a combination of things, but partially it's just natural load growth, population, and increasing amount of electricity that's being used, which is beneficial to have a lot of that. Some of it, maybe 15%, is from electric vehicles, but according to Public Service Company, their load growth, 72% of their load growth is attributed to data centers, what they anticipate. So 72% of their anticipated load growth is attributable to data centers. And so now nuclear power is a whole other issue, and our friend Chuck Kuchar has given excellent presentations right here on that topic. And personally, I think on the nuclear thing that I'm not overly concerned that it's going to be really actually happening in Colorado because it's too expensive. They used to say nuclear power is too cheap to meter. Now they're saying nuclear power is too expensive to matter.
Is this on? Okay, yeah. There are 2 bills that are being introduced in the Colorado State Legislature this year. One of them is having to rein in and put some guardrails on data centers. So it's a bill that's sponsored by Senator Kathy Kipp. So the thing that you guys can all do is contact your legislator and tell them that you support that bill. It's not perfect, but it's a start. I wish there were more guardrails on water, but it is a start at reining in data centers. So.
Yet another problem with the data center issue, it's not only in Colorado, it's everywhere, Pennsylvania, Virginia, is the uncertainty of what's going to happen. These are huge load centers. They're referring to them as large load customers. But a lot of them are very speculative. And even though they're speculative, if the utility is going to accommodate them, they have to start building the infrastructure, the distribution infrastructure, the transmission infrastructure, securing the power supplies to serve those large customers. And if they don't show up, guess who's stuck with the bill? So in these new bills that are coming up in the legislature, that's one of the things I'm going to be looking for. What sort of safeguards are there to ensure that customers don't get stuck with the bill if a data center makes big promises about what it's going to do, but then decides to go away? There are mechanisms to keep that monkey off customers' backs. I'm just, going to be looking for whether or not that is part of the bill.
Okay, we have a question back here.
Hi. A lot of the discussion has been about market and prices, and that makes a lot of sense. No pun intended. But as you mentioned, it didn't become economical until 2008, and we knew about this issue in 1988. And our main competitor in renewable resources is China, that has an organized economy. Do you think the price is an effective tool to meet the crisis that we have here in our country, or do we need a different method than relying on cheap energy to meet our goals?
Well, I don't think you can ignore cost, but I think there are many aspects to it. So, in Texas, the driver was primarily economic, okay? And the reason wind power did so well was not so much its value for reducing emissions, but because we had integrated it into the market in such a way that it became the most cost-effective resource fairly quickly. So a lot of the increase that we saw in wind power starting in 2008, a lot of that started in Texas because so much expansion was taking place in Texas, because that's where the investments were going. I think as far as what else we need beyond that, I guess I would look for two things. One would be to, first of all, kind of an easy next step, is to eliminate the distortions that are weighing against renewables that we're seeing, over the past 12 months. Getting those obstacles out of the way, I think there's a natural economic drive to expand renewables more than we've seen. Aside from that, I think, economic or ways to sort of bring into the equation things that are not easily monetized, things like public health, things like long-term reductions to carbon emissions. I think bringing those into the equation somehow, I think would be part of it.
I think this gets back to you need to meet people where they are. A lot of people are motivated by cost, and certainly my electric vehicle is a lot cheaper to run than a gas vehicle. That doesn't motivate everybody, but I think one area is health, and I think I'm a mom whose son nearly died of an asthma attack when he was a toddler. I'm also an athlete who has exercise-induced asthma, and when the ozone levels go up, I have to cut short my workouts. So one thing that I have done a lot with is I talk about gas stoves. There's been a lot of studies recently that there's one from RMI that said that if you heat a cup of water on a gas stove, just one cup, it violates the outdoor EPA levels for nitrogen dioxide. And kids who live in a home that has gas stoves have a 42% increased risk of asthma, of getting asthma, or having asthma attacks. And so I tell people, the next 5 to 10 years, people will think of burning fossil fuels in their homes the way they think of lead paint in their homes right now. And so health is one thing, you're burning fossil fuels in your home, and any building, burning fossil fuels, driving down the road, that causes our ozone problem here, and we have one of the worst ozone problems in the entire country. We have been 20 years out of compliance with ozone attainment, and we're not making any progress there. So that's one area. Something, might be economics, but I think, again, you need to meet people where they are. I think economics is a really big driver. What I'm inspired by, too, is Bill McKibben's latest book, which I can't remember the name of it right now, but that, thank you. Yeah, there's a lot of, so I think it's just finding out what works for different people. But economics, I think, is one of the biggest ones.
Yes, one question we have from those joining us online is, what do you think is the fundamental reason for Trump and his administration to be so anti-renewables and anything climate change?
I'm going to jump in first, but I think everybody has a little thing on that. I'll just say, basically, if people do not like competition. They love to have a real lock on the market, particularly if it's a monopoly. So when the motivation on the part of the administration is at the behest of the oil and gas industry and the coal industry as well, because they see this competition being renewable energy and energy efficiency, and they have the levers of power to be able to stomp on the competition. Is that right?
Renewable companies didn't contribute enough to Trump's campaign.
Follow the money.
Yeah, what Tracy just said. You might recall that during the last presidential campaign, Trump actually came out and said, hey, fossil fuel industry, give me $1 billion and I'll do whatever you want. Well, they probably gave him close to $1 billion. I don't know if we know the exact amount, no dark money that went in, but he's basically doing what they want. And Project 2025 was written by the Heritage Foundation. Heritage Foundation has long had a track record of doing what the fossil fuel industry wants, basically denying climate change, publishing disinformation about it. So these people are now in charge, and they're very forceful about doing what they want to do.
I think of just advocacy efforts happening, locally plus nationally. I do agree that we need to do our best to influence voters and our family members or friends or whatever outside the state of Colorado to reach their senators to advocate for the needs of both NREL and NCAR. Second, however, in mentioning the historical context of SERI and when there was a loss of significant staff during that transition, I'm thinking about how to maintain the morale and retention of staff in the community here, regardless of whether happens politically moving forward. And so I'm thinking of ways in which locally we could figure out ways to advocate for each other and support those communities. So it makes me think of, a lot of local businesses, for example, will have rainbow flags to help an LGBT community, or in Minneapolis, they have signs to not allow ICE or people that are against ICE to be more supportive or something like that. And I'm thinking of I know at NCAR, there's the You Engage program that partners with businesses to help support and provide discounts or engagement with local businesses by staff and have those connections and relationships built. And I believe NREL has the same thing for discount tickets like Winter Park or things like that. So, where do you see, I want to maybe further that opportunity perhaps to encourage businesses or local communities to support those communities, but where do you see opportunities for the local communities to engage with and support staff to help ensure that they feel supported and welcomed and maybe help lead to better retention?
And actually, that question goes to everybody in this room. If you have something to contribute, then speak up.
I really love that idea. I love that approach because I think it's sorely needed. I can't speak to what's happening at NCAR, but I do know that at NREL, and I'm going to say NREL, screw it. A lot of the employee support programs that had been funded up to 2024 have been canceled. So employees there aren't getting the internal support that they had before for managing stress, for fill in the blank. But I think anything that the community can do to step up and say, look, we're behind you, we understand what's going on, we believe in your mission and what you originally went to NREL to do. I've been working my personal contacts to try to provide a shoulder to lean on. And I think if anyone here knows folks at NREL, that would be a great first step.
Yeah, and when the managers of those, from the administration's network, when they see the local community outpouring love to the staff of those organizations, that really pisses them off. So I love it.
I think one of the things that's concerning is that NREL's mission, you said that, it's helpful for the community to support our mission, and it is, but our mission is totally different. Like, it's completely changing, right? It's the Genesis mission, and you can look that up online. We don't quite know exactly what that entails at the moment, but the name change is one thing, but it's indicative of where our mission is going, and we know that's entirely affected by our funding. So, what can be done to save NREL? That's what we're talking about, right? And I guess for me, I'm also curious as to, because I'm obviously speaking on my own behalf, not NREL's here, but one of my concerns is what can I do as a citizen, not an NREL employee, to make a difference in the next election? Like, what would you say are the top 3 things we as citizens can do to make a big difference or a measurable difference in the upcoming election?
My heart goes out to both of you. I just can't imagine what you're going through, and I am hoping that if there's any ideas that you have, like how you need help, this forum is here to start that process. So, again, I'm just very, very sorry to hear that. One thing that is a little hard to do, but you asked a question, like what can I make a difference in? In the last election, I signed up for calling people in Pennsylvania. And you can get trained on it. They have all sorts of things of like how you do it. The key, I said, is start where people are. It's a little bit scary, but I'd have to say that I convinced 3 voters to, yeah. So it is popular, and you think, does that really make a difference? Well, just one of the most competitive races in the House right here in Colorado was was lost by just a handful of votes. But in that race, I convinced a whole family of voters, and it takes just everybody doing their little part. So that's what I can think of doing, but I think it's really also really, really important. You can get really Debbie Downer about right now. And so I think it's really important to do something local that feeds your soul. And so one thing, just an idea, there's a group called Go Electric Colorado that has homeowners who have put in heat pumps or done some weatherization. They talk to other homeowners about how to do it. There's many different ways that you can get involved. If it's, testifying before a committee at the Public Utilities Commission, I know that can be a little scary, but you guys, they want to, here's the thing that makes a difference in politicians' minds, if they're at all amenable to this. It's the personal stories that you tell, not the facts and figures and all that. But if you go before a state committee or a utilities commission or even your city council and you talk about your personal story and how whatever it is impacting you or how it's impacted you, I have seen votes and decisions change on the spot because of those personal stories. So I hope that helps a little bit, but my heart goes out to you guys.
Definitely, canvassing and all those things, really, really important. But what things can we focus on if we're trying to change public opinion on, policy, specific policy that's going to make the biggest difference? What are the things, what are the actions?
I do it by advocating for state laws, like the data center bill that's coming up. Okay, so talk to your legislator, write letters. The thing, if you're a constituent, they will listen to you. Okay, so that's the key thing. It isn't you writing not a form letter to anybody. If it's a very personal letter, or if you talk to them as a phone call, they keep track of those things. If they are your if you're their constituent, they will respond. But do it with personal stories. So that's one way. I hope that helped.
I have concerns about the whole electrification push with the challenges we're having with power outages. And I think this is a real problem with trying to sway voters to come to renewable energy. It's, every time the power goes out in my neighborhood, a dozen generators go on, and it's super obnoxious, and they emit their own emissions. So I think sometimes we all have our biases and blind spots, and one of them for renewable energy is to miss some of the other important parts of it. We're so focused on solar and wind, we need to get our grid to be more reliable and stand up to wildfire. So I'd just like to hear some comments about that.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I think it also speaks to the need for having the kind of research at NREL that NREL has been doing for the past decades to continue, because it's not just R&D focused on wind turbines or solar panels. It's a lot of it is grid integration. I was involved in a lot of studies that looked at what is the best way to integrate larger penetrations of wind and solar on the grid and maintain reliability to the standards that that we have to see. So that's kind of a boring part of it, but it's really essential, and it's an area that NREL has led for years and years. So yes, that concern is there, but it's also something that has been the target of a lot of great research coming out of NREL.
If you look at what happened to PG&E in California with the fires there, I mean, there are cases where, these are for-profit investor-owned utilities, and when they have a choice between making a profit and pouring money into maintenance, profit tends to win. And it's the same with Excel or Piesco, and that is that they're shutting down the grid on windy days, because they're worried about lines getting into trees. Well, the way to fix that is to cut the branches and have a more resilient grid, but that costs money. And so I think we have to be more forceful about getting utilities to do the right thing. I will say this, and that is, of all the places I've ever lived, we've had more grid outages here, and our house is a few blocks from here in Applewood. We must get 2 or 3 8 or 10 hour outages a year. And so our house, we do have a solar array on the roof, and it's all electric. We have a cold climate heat pump. And we have a Hyundai Ioniq 5 electric car with vehicle-to-grid capability. And I installed, it's just a few $100s, a transfer box. Whenever the grid goes down, I go out, plug the car in. It's got a 77 kilowatt-hour battery. That's the size of 6 Tesla Powerwalls that's just sitting in my car. You know, I tell people, when you buy an electric car, a battery electric car with vehicle-to-grid capability, or vehicle-to-load capability, really, they throw in an enormous home battery for free, and it's sitting there, so why not use it? And that works. I mean, we had an outage, I think maybe about 4 or 5 weeks, maybe 5 weeks ago. When was Golden shut down? That was about 4 or 5 weeks ago. Anyway, my wife was watching a movie in the living room. I was working on something to study. Our lights were all on. The rest of our neighborhood was all dark. So, I mean, that really works, and you're going to see more and more electric vehicles come out. We don't have, not too many vehicles have 240 volt capability yet. They're basically 120. Our P pump runs at 240. But, you know, we have a plug-in electric resistance heater, and I had that plugged in just in case it really got cold that night. We didn't need it. But this capability is going to keep expanding. I think we're going to see more vehicle-to-home and eventually vehicle-to-grid capability, because there'll be a lot of batteries out there. We got to make use of them.
Okay, we have another question from Zoom.
Yes, from the folks on Zoom, we had first just a general question about how many federal, like NREL or climate-related employees have been fired to date, and then is there any more anticipated in 2026? And then there's broader interest in greater question to know about and be a part of any efforts to keep people whose projects were taken down, or like funding or projects to keep those going, or even like a state-run temporary project to continue NREL and NCAR's missions, as well as like instating more local programs like RE Climate Work and Restore Colorado to try and keep these efforts going, since they are no longer federal workers or their funding has lapsed.
That's a very big, broad question, but I'll take a first stab at chipping away at it. So far, from my understanding, and none of us here are active NREL employees, maybe the NREL employee here could chime in if we mischaracterize anything, about 145 people were laid off, and there was fear that a second round of very, very bigger layoffs was going to occur when the end of this year's funding came through. It now looks like, and again, this is not passed yet, but it looks like a bill will pass that will continue to fund NREL at near the levels that they're getting now, but it's not aligned with the historic mission at all. And a lot of people will probably decide to go if they're forced to work on AI related to data centers instead of working on clean energy. So, but I remember what brought me here tonight was the memory of 2017, when the first Trump administration tried to zero out NREL's budget, and the Republicans in the Senate stood up and say, no, we're not doing that. We're going to, in fact, increase NREL's budget, and you're going to have to spend it on wind and solar, because that's what we're telling you to spend it on. And that needs to happen again after the next midterm occurs.
Thank you guys so much for being here tonight. I'm Lashida. I run a nonprofit here in town called Women Who Charge. And we run a number of training programs, teaching people how to repair EV charging stations. And then we have another one coming up to teach people how to maintain utility scale battery energy storage systems. What's really fascinating, when we get 15 random folks that are interested in new jobs in these training programs, we find out how how little the public understands about energy and about the climate and about greenhouse gases. I mean, there's a chasm. It's large. It's really big. And we spend several days at the beginning of each of our training sessions just educating about energy, about how energy and power moves. And it's almost it's the same when we're in a high school environment with the EV Academy. So one of the things that someone mentioned earlier, and I just wanted to chime in on a potential solution. First of all, like CRES, my nonprofit is always looking for volunteers, especially if you're comfortable talking about energy. Secondly, we have to acknowledge that when people are turning on their generators, it's because that's all they had. And at some point or another, there needs to be the conversation with your neighbors about the other alternatives of things like a battery energy storage pack instead of a gas generator. And at Women Who Charge, it was because we sat in on one of the training programs and we heard this concern. They were like, well, all I'm going to do is turn on my gas generator. And we're like, what? Why would you do that? Why wouldn't you get a car that could be your backup? Why wouldn't you have, for a lot of us in this room, it probably seems very simple. And I know our legislator said to meet them where they're at. And a lot of that means understanding that they still think that the only alternative that they have for backup when the power goes out is gas. And we have batteries at Women Who Charge that we rent out to folks. But we had to get them in there to start talking about it. So thank you again.
You've been waiting for a long time.
I think you in the back, you mentioned something about like the sense finally making sense, right? The money's there. But my question kind of goes back to that. Now that we have a little bit of a president who's like disregarded precedent and is kind of paving a pathway for expanded executive power, is there a potential for us to benefit from that if we are to win another election and be able to pass more substantive changes that I think of like the Industrial Revolution, or I think of things that came top down. And in a way that this was the change that needed to happen, and it made sense for the people in the world in the future. Just kind of wondering if maybe if there's a silver lining to the tyranny.
I think what you're asking, are you asking at the state level or the federal level, or where up from there? Well, there's always environmental bills that are going forward every single year. Not as much this year because we have such a severe budget crisis. But the ideas, what I've seen over my few years of being a politician is that the ideas, states look to other ideas, to other states for ideas. And so that's why I say Colorado's leading the way in a lot of things. A lot of other states are looking at, look what Colorado did. We can do that here. We'll copy their legislation and make it a lot easier. So that kind of stuff is going on all the time. So, but it's not going to be a very interesting year this year, other than this big old data center bill. There's some other interesting things coming, but we have a real budget crisis this year. But it's still, there's other ways. It isn't just laws. Okay. Testifying or getting involved with a Public Utilities Commission hearings, there's a lot of important things going on right now. Rate cases, clean heat plans. I mean, there's many, many things like that. And it's amazing. I've just seen if you get involved in that and you tell your local elected leader, can you please talk to the PUC about this kind of stuff? I've seen major changes just happened last fall with the clean heat targets. And it's because so many people showed up and said their mind, and it really made a difference. So those are some ideas.
Yeah, when I was speaking before, and I mentioned, Colorado is really a leader in sales of electric vehicles. So electrifying transportation, we're doing pretty well. Electrifying homes has been tougher. PSCo is both a gas and an electric utility. They're not wild about giving up their gas utility. And so a number of us have been working on this on the CRES Policy Committee. And, we've made some progress. So we testified at the Clean Heat Plan a year ago, and some of the testimony we put in that basically argued that when we do new housing developments, we need to use geothermal or ground-coupled heat pumps. That's great for a number of reasons that I won't go into. But when the PUC then made its directive to PSCo, some of the language in our testimony, actually appeared in that. And now there's this gas infrastructure plan where, we're basically arguing, again, they have to be, right now they kind of have a volunteer program. They go to builders and say, hey, have you thought about heat pumps? Oh, no? Oh, well, that's too bad. We need to be much more forceful about getting buildings to be electrified, especially in new buildings, because if you build a new housing development, right now Excel's going to, there's like 35,000 new homes in Excel's territory that will be getting gas infrastructure, gas piping. When you've invested that money in gas piping, that piping lasts 70, 80 years, and the furnaces that'll go into those homes, they last 20 years. And so you're committing yourself to air pollution emissions and carbon emissions well into the future. So we're really working hard on that, along with many, many other organizations. We're just one of many environmentally oriented organizations that are trying to accelerate electrification.
I have to add on to this. Okay, you can do an action right now. You can look up Physicians for Social Responsibility, PSR, and they have a whole toolkit on how you can testify before the Public Utilities Commission on the thing that Chuck and I have been deep in the weeds working and advocating on. That's an action you take, I think it's just in the next week or so. So look up Physicians for Social Responsibility, and they'll have that.
I just want to jump in and add to what the Women That Charge statement. You don't need to get a generator as a backup. You don't even have to have the newer electric cars. You don't have to have a lot of things. You can buy a box, I just did, that's a 3,600 kilowatt hour, 3,600 watt hour, and it's $1,700, and it can sit in your house. You can plug, if you're an old guy with medical issues, your CPAP, your oxygen generator at night, so you don't die when Excel cuts you off. And then you can take it in the kitchen and you can plug in the refrigerator in the daytime to get it cold again. And so you don't have to, because my electric car, I got it in 16, so it does not have that capability. It's still running beautifully. But anyway, you can do these that big, $1,700.
Oh, well, thank you very much. Chuck wants to chime in.
I just want to say that's a really good point, Stephen. And that lady in the back, I don't know if she's still there, basically has an organization that actually rents out batteries, so you don't even have to buy them. So that's another way to do what you're talking about. Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry to say we didn't get to all of the questions, neither on Zoom or in this room, but let's break it up. I really encourage you to talk to me or any of the panelists if you have constructive ideas on how we can turn this into a campaign to further support renewable energy and science in Colorado and nationwide. So do talk to us. Let's move into the foyer. We have wine and beer and lots of finger foods for you to enjoy. Keep it up. Thank you.